Welcome back. Let's continue with our next session and welcome to the stage Miss Jessica Aguilera, teacher of English at the Universidad Católica de la Santísima Concepción, Universidad Técnica Federico Santa María in Chile. So, hi Jessica.
Hello, Talia.
How are you?
Fine.
Great. So, I'm going to put your presentation. So, stage is yours now. Thank you.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. My name is Jessica Aguilera, and today I will be presenting a revision that I've done and that I conducted actually last year, in which I checked several studies conducted in Chile, in which they analyzed different feedback practices in our educational context. So my name is Jessica Aguilera, and here we are going to start. First of all, this presentation is going to start with a literature review. We're going to check a few concepts about feedback. Then I will explain what was the analysis that was conducted with the articles that I checked. I will share with you some findings and a few conclusions about that. So first of all, about feedback. We all seem to have a clear idea of what feedback is, but usually what we understand by that, it's like a very general concept. So what we're going to do here is we're going to analyze a few definitions by several authors. First of all, feedback is recognized as the information that we provide regarding a student or a person's performance, that is given by a teacher, by a computer, or even by the same student when it's kind of an analysis of their own performance. This information can be given with the purpose of reducing the distance that there is between what the student is able to produce in comparison to what he is expected to produce by the teacher. So that distance or that gap, as some authors call it, that is the information that the information is given in order to reduce that gap. Some authors say that feedback is one of the most influential factors in the learning process. The presence of feedback in the classroom is quite relevant in order for the students to realize how much have they learned and whether they are going through a right way or not. So, considering that, feedback is key for the learning process. I personally like the definition that Voerman provided in his in the investigation that he conducted with other investigators. They said that feedback is the information provided by the teacher concerning, yes, the performance or the understanding that the students have, but what it is important about the definition that they provide is that it's not just in terms of what is good or what is bad, but they also focus on feedback as information that it can be given also about the process and how much a student has advanced throughout the whole course of a single class or a period of time. So now, when we talk about feedback, there are different models and different ways in which we can classify what feedback is and what strategies we can use. To start here, feedback, I'm presenting Hattie and Timperley's model of feedback. They say that feedback can be first based on the information given on the task that the students had to deal with, especially the task, Then as a second point to keep in mind that feedback, it's also can be given also about the processing, of the task, and also about how the student is advancing through the development of that task, about the monitoring of the students' performance, but not just when the task is finished, but also when he is performing it, before he hands out the last version of whatever the task it is. There are some other ways to see feedback as feedback about the self, about the person. There are many studies that have analyzed what is an effective or an ineffective feedback, and this one, the last one, number 4, is said to be the least effective. If we are giving comments based on the student and his, personal characteristics, or how he attempted, how he or she dealt with an activity, but not based on the activity itself, that seemed to be like the least effective. So when we analyze feedback, because not all feedback is good, that is something that some authors have claimed. So some of them say that for feedback to be effective, it needs to be specific, but not too elaborate. That means that if we are going to provide feedback on a student's writing task, we need to be clear about what it is going to be commented by the teacher, very, very specific, but not to give too much information because the student might get lost. And also, as we just mentioned before, that feedback has to be focused just on the task and the different stages of developing a task, but not on the person, as it is the first aspect that is mentioned with the ineffective feedback. Another thing that is claimed to be not effective is when we just praise a student saying, this is good, this is awesome, this is excellent, you did it very well, but the student actually doesn't know what was that he or she did very well. So in that case, it needs to be a bit more specific, a little bit more detailed, in order for the student to understand whether he is advancing or not. And of course, to have a very good clear of what he's doing or she's doing in the right way and what needs to be improved. So now, as I mentioned before, there are several models and several ways in which we classify the different feedback strategies. And here we have a new classification provided by Contreras-Pe and Zúñiga-González. They are from Chile, and they all show this definition in which we can classify feedback into negative and positive. That is to say, this is wrong, this is not okay in a task done by the student. And on the other side, positive, just to say good, great, awesome, but again, not giving much information. Now, when we continue with our with the next category here, we have that feedback should be specific, as we can be specific or general. And if it is specific, as we said before, it doesn't have to be so detailed in order for the student to acquire all that information and use it in a good way. In our context, corrective feedback has, in the EFL context and ESL context, corrective feedback, it has a very important role. So we're going to be checking that in the next slide. We continue with the next. Here, the authors say that feedback can also be just descriptive and evaluating, and also it can be considered as retroactive and proactive. And in this case, what they claim is that you can provide feedback not just at the end of the process and just after grading a student, but you can also have that as an opportunity for students to redo, to think about a task that they have already done, and correct and improve and have a chance of getting a better mark because of the feedback that you provided and because of the comments that you could have given about that. The next category here, it's when the feedback can, as we mentioned before, focus on the task, the process, and the process of developing that task, and also about how the student is dealing with that activity. Finally, here we have a convergent and divergent category. We can classify feedback into those categories. The first one will be explaining what is the correct answer, and identifying in considering that explanation of what is the correct answer, identifying students' errors, and the second one, it is just to motivate students to rebuild their knowledge and to rethink about what their performance was, but considering the comments given by the teacher. Now, when we talk about feedback in the EFL context, it's impossible not to talk about errors first, because what we deal with in our case, it's with the presence of the absence of errors in a student's performance. This can be, of course, in when they present written tasks, or when they have to deal with speaking activities. So errors are considered to be faulty or incomplete, faulty. Sorry, they have. I'm just going to read it. So the use of the linguistic item in a way which, according to fluent uses of the language, indicated faulty or incomplete learning. So that deals with that the student. There's something the student doesn't know about how to use the language correctly, and of course, to say that they have into consideration what the native speakers will use and will not use or produce in the language. So sometimes, as it is here said, it is of course linked with the lack of knowledge. But we know that when the students are performing a task, there might be errors, but also we know the difference between errors and mistakes. And sometimes there might be some, aspects of the performance that are not right, but that might be just because of the student was not paying enough of attention, or probably the person was nervous, and that doesn't necessarily mean that the student doesn't know. That is just important to say, yes. When we talk about errors here, we have different types of errors, linguistic, content, and sometimes when we talk about classroom interaction and discourse, those are also types of errors that the literature has described that usually happen in the EFL classroom. So as errors, and when dealing with them is important, corrective feedback has a great role in the process of learning foreign languages. And over here, we have that corrective feedback is any indication, any kind of response that the teacher uses in order to deal with one incorrect answer or error that the student has shown in a performance. And how to deal with that, with the corrective feedback, there are several strategies that were first introduced by Ranta and Lister. And here on the right of the screen, we have the first strategies that they presented, and over here we have those strategies are recast and explicit correction, and those are associated with the students reformulating what they have already produced. Then elicitation, metalinguistic clue, clarification request, and repetition. Okay, this was like the initial taxonomy created by Ranta and Lister, and that has been growing throughout the years, and because of the studies that have been conducted. So later on, we have a new version by Chilean and Ellis. And the latest, this is the last way in which the last taxonomy we again have almost the same strategies that we dealt before, with clarification requests, with recast, with elicitation, with metalinguistic clues. But this time they are like kind of a continuous way to show this, because on the one side you have that they can be very explicit or implicit, and they could ask for students' reformulation. So they are just prompts for them to identify themselves whether there is an error or not, or whether they made a mistake. Okay, so literature tells us a lot about feedback, and it's not just correcting what it is or saying what it is good or bad. And there are several strategies that we could use in our classrooms. So In order to have a little bit context about what is going on in Chile, here I have the findings of a study conducted by Contreras-Pe and Zoghi Gonzalez. And what they said, they found out, they analyzed portfolios and interviews with teachers that are part of a national assessment or evaluation process, and they found out that feedback it is mainly used to explain and justify the final mark that the students got in a test or in a task. Yes, so therefore the vision it is just to correct mistakes. It's just focus on correcting mistakes, and some with a very important focus on praising students. And the findings of the studies also suggest a conception of feedback that has a specification of failed learning. So that is that we're just focusing on why and what they haven't learned, but not about what they have learned and how much they have progressed, which is one key aspect of feedback that is not considered. So what we did last year when we checked all these articles, it was to look for several articles in the internet, yes, that were giving us some findings about studies conducted throughout a very long period of time, that is 15 years, from 2005 and 2020. And we analyzed only articles that showed information about studies conducted in primary school, secondary school, and higher school that were dealing, of course, with the context of teaching English as a foreign language. In that research, we had, in that process of researching for these articles, we looked for articles in English and Spanish, and over there you have the words that we used to look for them, for all those articles. So mainly we found that the information, the results of all, the findings of all these studies were not very easy to find. They were mainly in those journals or journals associated with Cielo, Dialnet, and of course Google Scholar. So initially we find 28 articles, but after a process of checking how many of them were repeated or how many of them were really, we could really have access to the whole article, we ended up with just 15. And here you have that the research in our country, in Chile, has just like focused on higher education students and mainly people who are studying to become teachers of English, okay? And that is with the 47% of articles we're dealing with that. And then when we analyzed what type of tasks were they dealing with, most of the articles just checked activities that were dealing with writing tasks, okay? And just 80% of the articles were dealing with that, and just 20% with speaking. Now, what were like the major findings? We tried to describe all the different studies that were analyzed there. So first of all, when we were talking about primary education, mainly, studies here in Chile, that means that the students are in 5th, 6th, and 7th grades in primary school. Those feedback studies were dealing with writing tasks, basically writing short stories and portfolios. And when we were talking about speaking tasks, that was dealing with very short dialogues, mainly between the teacher and student, and students saying short sentences and isolated words, just pronunciation of words. So what type of feedback do we use or do we find over there, which was very similar for primary education, secondary, higher education, is that teachers usually provide corrective feedback, considering, yes, the errors, the presence of absence of errors, explicit, very direct feedback, positive, saying good, this is bad, and positive and negative feedback. And the strategies that the teachers mainly used was repetition, elicitation, clarification requests, and metalinguistic feedback. So in that sense, they used a very a very wide amount of strategies just to describe the types of feedback they were providing. Now, methods, how they delivered this feedback, usually in class, it was speaking, when the teacher commented on the mistakes, and that is of course for speaking activities. And when we had like written tasks or written work, over there the teachers have kind of developed a strategy. First of all, if they had a written task, they would leave some comments, or they would use a coding system. For instance, I don't know, for grammar, GRA for grammar, for vocabulary, if there is a problem there, VOC. They kind of develop a system to mark errors with codes, also highlighting mistakes and providing some kind of comment why that is right or not or wrong. And sometimes they just included the right answer. So as we can see over here, and because of the level of English, most of the time the feedback provided was in Spanish. Only in higher education, when we had, of course, students who were studying to become teachers, the comments were mainly in English. So as to some comments and some ideas that I can share with you after analyzing all these articles, is that first of all, there is a need to deepen teachers' knowledge about feedback. That is not just what is wrong, but also about the different kind of strategies that teachers can use. Of course, we need to include this kind of training process for pre-service and in-service teachers, because apparently there is some work to be done over there, because there is we need to include this kind of strategies and include them in the teacher education programs in order for them to later be able to apply them into the classroom. And several of the studies that I found, they were in like libraries, like digital libraries from private universities, so I couldn't access the whole text. And that is something that probably we could try to expand and share the local knowledge. And a way to do that is just to have open access to local research. That's it. I don't know if I have completed the time. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Jessica. Let's see, we have any questions from the audience. So we are going to check if we have any questions. So Francisco says, absolutely, feedback is a key tool for teachers, also to get to know with each of the students their weaknesses and strengths in order to make a more efficient teaching approach. Ana Maria asks, how does the quality of feedback influence the students' learning process?
Okay, that is very important. As I mentioned in the presentation, of course, feedback, in order to be effective, needs to be, for instance, very precise, not too general as the different authors suggest, and something that other writers have said is that we should try to be persistent in the strategies we use, so students they understand that, for instance, correcting is something very simple when you just correct what they have just if there is a mistake. But for instance, if you're using metalinguistic clues, it's good for the students to get used to those types of clues, so you kind of repeat that type of feedback throughout the time, so they understand that you're not just going to give them the right answer, but that you're going to be using other strategies, and in that case you can also vary the amount of information and the amount of strategies in order to have good quality feedback, because just indicating what is right or wrong, or it might be useful at the beginning, but later on we need to help them to develop this critical analysis of their own performance.
Thank you, Jessica. Edgar asked if any strategy true for teachers to provide formative feedback to large classes.
Oh, that is a very interesting question, because, well, normally here in Chile, our classes could have, I don't know, 40, 45 students, which is a huge amount, yeah, and feedback takes a lot of time. So, for instance, if you are working with, I don't know, a writing task, that or even a speaking task, what we could do is, when you have like huge or very large classes, you could just start by giving like general comments based on the performance by the whole group, because if we go individually, which is the ideal thing to do, yeah, it takes a lot of time. But in order to start, we could just have like general comments based on the performance of the whole class.
Thank you, Jessica. Ana Maria Hurtado asked, how can teachers be trained to provide effective feedback?
Okay, first of all, I think we need to start like kind of studying a little bit, get familiarized with the different strategies, because, you know, as teachers, probably we use them all the time in the classroom, but we actually don't know that, I don't know, this is recast, this is elicitation, this is part of an implicit or explicit kind of feedback. Probably we do all them, we put different strategies into practice all the time, and we are not very conscious. So sometimes when you ask teachers what's feedback, they usually say, okay, it's just saying what is right, what is wrong, and how do you give feedback, and they just think of the first direct message. But I'm very sure that most of us, while we are in the classroom, we are, I don't know, including different types of strategies. So first of all, probably just to analyze our own performance, the different things that we do in class. And we might have, if we have a checklist, we might be like, I don't know, saying, I do this, several of those. But of course, we will have to kind of complete that with extra, I don't know, training processes. And why not, sometimes when we provide feedback, we could kind of share ideas of how would we provide feedback on speaking performance, on writing tasks. Because for example, what I've read about writing, which is the area that has been studied the most, is that at the beginning, people normally, teachers usually focus on aspects like grammar, vocabulary, spelling, but then when they advance a little more, they go with content, organization, and all that type of process probably started by one person just doing the work alone in the classroom. But then when you start sharing your ideas and sharing your strategies with other teachers, that might help like with the whole process of learning more about that.
Thank you, Jessica. I have a last question for you. Do you think the type of relationship between a teacher and their students can influence the feedback? I mean, there are teachers and students who are closer than others. So do you think this can influence that kind of feedback we give or not?
Well, it shouldn't. As teachers, we should be able to do that, like to comment on our students' performance without having like that kind of issues, like interview in the process. But what it is true is that when you have a very good relationship with students, and if you start giving feedback considering that feedback sometimes it's about what they haven't done correctly. If you have a good relationship with them, they might be asking for extra, I don't know, guidance for extra comments if you do have a good relationship with them. So that might help a lot. On the other side, if probably you provide the same kind of or the same quality feedback, if the student probably is not interested, or if the student doesn't get along well with the teacher, probably he's not going to ask for further help. That might
Okay.
be.
Okay, Jessica, it's time to finish this session. Thank you. Your presentation was very useful and everybody is really happy. So please come back in 5 minutes to start our next presentation. Thank you, everyone.